You commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control.
Get rid of the ballots, and there won't need to be a transition of power. There will be a continuation of power. Get rid of the ballots, and there won't need to be a transition of power. Frankly, there will be a continuation of power. What does he mean by get rid of the ballots? He literally means get rid of the ballots. Whatever ballots come in for this supposed election, get rid of them. Make sure they're not counted. I mean, this isn't some inarticulate blurt or neural misfire from the president speaking at the podium at the White House tonight. This is what he is saying consistently now over the last few days. This is what he means.
With the unsolicited millions of ballots that they're sending, it's a scam, it's a hoax. Everybody knows that. And the Democrats know it better than anybody else. So you're going to need 9 justices up there. I think it's going to be very important, because what they're doing is a hoax with the ballots.
What they're doing is a hoax with the ballots. Get rid of the ballots, and there won't need to be a transition of power. There will be a continuation of power, because with no ballots to tell anybody otherwise, he'll just stay. This is not a hyperbolic interpretation of what the president is saying. This is not him verbally glitching like he sometimes does. These are not idle musings from the president. This is now insistently and repeatedly and consistently from him where we are at now.
This scam that the Democrats are pulling, it's a scam. The scam will be before the United States Supreme Court. I think it's very important to have a 9th justice.
All those remarks from the president today and yesterday. The president now saying insistently that the election will not be decided by the voters, that this election is not a real election. The ballots that we will all use to vote in the election, those ballots are a scam. We need to get rid of the ballots. He also is saying explicitly that he expects the Supreme Court, to which he is trying to appoint a new justice right before the election, he expects that it will be the Supreme Court which handles the question of who the next president is. Rather than the election itself, rather than the voters, it'll be the court. And he expects that the conservative majority will throw out the ballots, and then we won't have to worry about any transition of power, peaceful or otherwise, because it'll be a continuation of power then, because he will stay.
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation.
Yeah, it'll be very peaceful when I stay in power, because we'll stop the ballots. We have to get rid of those, and then I'll continue in power. We are here. It is now upon us. There is not any ambiguity about where this is heading or how bad his intentions might be or what lengths he'd go to. I mean, we're here. When the president said weeks ago that he wanted to delay the election, remember that? Elected Republicans at least said at that point, no, we don't think we're going to delay the election. The election will happen in November. But now he's just flat out saying that the reason he wants to move ahead with getting a new Supreme Court justice on the bench before the election is because he's declaring now in advance that ballots cast in the election don't count. That ballots cast in the election are part of a fraud and a hoax that is illegitimate, and therefore it will be the court, including his newly appointed justice, that will, what was the phrase he used? That will, quote, get rid of the ballots to stop the Democratic hoax election so there doesn't have to be a transfer of power to a new president. We are there, everybody. It took 4 years, turns out. 244 years to stand this republic up, 4 years to cut it down. Just under 1,000 Americans died today from coronavirus. We are still up around 40,000 new cases a day. And every single day now, 7 days a week, we lose 400, 500, 700, 900, 1,000 Americans dying every day depending on the day, depending on where it's surging now. Missouri's Republican Governor Mike Parson and his wife just announced that they have tested positive. The First Lady of Missouri is apparently sick from her infection as well, although the governor says he feels well. Like a number of pro-Trump Republican governors, Governor Parson in Missouri has been something of a COVID denialist. Here's him at a political event, a steak fry in July, telling a not socially distanced, mostly elderly crowd, "You don't need government to tell you to wear a dang mask." Governor Parson is tonight resting at home with his wife. He's canceled his upcoming events. Neither of them is hospitalized, but both have now tested positive. CNN reporting today that Dr. Deborah Birx from the White House Coronavirus Task Force is, quote, distressed over the direction of the White House Coronavirus Task Force right now and the rise of a quack radiologist from Fox News who's apparently taken over the Coronavirus Task Force now from the infectious disease and epidemiological experts who used to be part of it, including Dr. Birx herself. The president apparently prefers the advice he's getting from the radiologist guy who has no experience in epidemiology or infectious disease. He publicly and apparently privately has questioned why people need masks and whether it might be a good thing to get as many people as possible infected. And boy, it seems like there's too much testing, doesn't there? The president likes his advice, and so that's what the White House is running with. So that's who's in charge of U.S. policy on coronavirus now. Meanwhile, today, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the infectious disease expert in the U.S. government, lost his cool with one Republican senator today who kept spewing that same kind of Fox News nonsense about herd immunity and all the rest. Dr. Redfield, the head of the CDC, is facing calls today for his resignation amid mounting reports of how he has failed to protect his agency, how he has succumbed and acceded and even participated in levying political pressure from the White House and other Trump administration officials against the scientists of his own agency, pressuring them to distort and skew CDC scientific findings and reports to match the nonsense coming from the White House. Some of that reporting about Redfield being a willing instrument of that pressure from the White House is coming from right here on this show. Today in Congress, under oath, CDC Director Robert Redfield answered questions about our reporting last night on him effectively tampering with CDC science, tampering with the report of CDC scientists who were investigating COVID transmission at meatpacking plants, making them rescind their report and water it down. In an industry where tens of thousands of Americans have gotten infected at work and hundreds have died. We'll have more on that coming up this hour. But this mix that we now live in, right? This mix of profound government failure and increasingly rapid, profound government radicalization, right? We've got over 200,000 Americans dead in 6 months. 20% of the world's fatalities, and we've got 4% of the world's population. We've got the most fatalities in the world, the biggest epidemic in the world, and growing. Our public health agencies undercut and messed with, the economy a smoking wreck, the corruption in government off the charts to the point where it's literally hard to keep track on a daily basis, even when, like me, you get paid every day to follow this stuff in the news. I mean, it barely even made a ripple today that the guy who's been running the Homeland Security Department, he's up for confirmation belatedly now after illegally running that agency for months without being confirmed. Turns out his wife's firm has received $6 million in Homeland Security Department contracts since he's been on board there. They never had contracts with Homeland Security before now, but they sure do now since her husband, Chad Wolf, got a Trump administration job there. I mean, that is a show-stopping multi-million-dollar corruption allegation in any other modern presidency. But here, good luck squeezing a single headline or two out of that one. But it's absolutely par for the course when the corruption is this thick in this administration. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, this one went completely without notice. A couple weeks ago, we finally learned what was going on when the Trump energy secretary mysteriously and suddenly quit the cabinet, quit government, right when impeachment charges were being brought against the president over him trying to force Ukraine to help him win re-election. Turns out the Trump Energy Secretary, Rick Perry, had been using his own government job at the time, his cabinet position as Energy Secretary, to try to line up what might have been a $20 billion energy deal in Ukraine for a company run by his own political donors that he had just left the board of and that he has returned to the board of since he suddenly and unexpectedly quit right in the middle of impeachment. And again, like, blip. That wasn't even one day's news, because he can't keep up. Today, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin published his long-promised report, which he said would prove terrible things about Vice President Biden and Ukraine and Biden's son and stuff. And it did not land the way Senator Johnson hoped it would. This, for example, was the headline today from the New York Times on Senator Johnson's work. Quote, Republican inquiry finds no evidence of wrongdoing by Biden. The report, delivered on Wednesday, appeared to be little more than a rehashing of unproven allegations that echoed a Russian disinformation campaign. That's not the way he hoped it would land, but when you're Senator Johnson, you get what you can. Senator Johnson's sources for his dud supposed bombshell report on Joe Biden included one guy who was just sanctioned by the U.S. government for being, quote, an active Russian agent for over a decade, maintaining close connections with the Russian intelligence services. The sanctions declaration against him said that in that role for Russian intelligence, this guy was, quote, waging a covert influence campaign centered on cultivating false and unsubstantiated narratives concerning U.S. officials in the 2020 presidential election. Senator Ron Johnson started denying that he had anything to do with that source, who's a Russian intelligence agent, after the sanctions announcement against him. But he kept citing another source that the FBI explicitly warned Congress about back in March, telling Congress that they should not necessarily take information from this other guy either, because they believed him to be a conduit for more Russian intelligence-derived disinformation intended to disrupt our election. But Senator Johnson went ahead with it anyway, because that guy was his witness from whom he was getting all this good dirt. Published his report. Look at all this stuff I got about Biden, none of which is proven, but all of which came out of the mouth of this guy who the FBI says is a conduit for Russian intelligence to influence our election. Senator Johnson doesn't have anything on Joe Biden or his family. But he did produce an 80-something page report today that turns out is a pretty good index as to what Russian intelligence has been cooking up this year to try to help Trump get reelected. And this time they're doing it with a knowing assist from the elected Republican U.S. Senator who chairs the Homeland Security Committee, even after the FBI explicitly warned against it. The FBI also issuing that public warning last night that, in their words, foreign actors and cyber criminals will try to attack and disrupt the U.S. presidential election this year, specifically by exploiting the fact that we're not likely to have a result on election night. It will take a while to certify election results, even in normal times, but this year, with COVID necessitating a lot of mail-in balloting, it could take longer than usual, and that, the FBI's warning, is expected to create basically a bullseye for foreign actors and cybercriminals seeking to do us harm. For foreign actors who want to make us disbelieve that the election is sound and that the election results can and should be trusted and that they will produce an election result that tells us legitimately who the next president of the United States will be. Foreign actors seeking to do us harm will seek to undermine our confidence in the election by telling us that it is a hoax and by telling us that any ballots that are counted after Election Day are some sort of scam. Foreign actors seeking to do us harm will stoke that, per the FBI. Also, the president will stoke that and do that from the White House tonight, per your own eyes and ears. The president is doing exactly what the FBI just warned us is being done by foreign powers hostile to us to try to undo our democracy. They're doing it covertly. The president is doing out loud. It's the exact same message. And it's apparently not just him. As Trump-appointed officials from the White House spokesperson to the Attorney General and everyone in between starts parroting the president's disinformation about how the ballots are a problem and the ballots can't be trusted. Reporter Barton Gellman reports today at The Atlantic that the Trump re-election campaign and Republican legislatures are working right now on a plan to nullify the ballots, to nullify the results of November's election and just install Trump directly for another term through the Electoral College. And again, I know it's like, this sounds like brainstorming, right? It sounds like the worst case scenario stuff that everybody tried to stretch their brains to come up with as a democracy in peril mind game when Trump started talking in these small d anti-democratic ways in 2016. But now it's here, right? And it's solid reporting about what they're doing, and it's our own eyes and ears in terms of what the president is standing in the White House saying. It's no longer theoretical. We don't have to wonder about it anymore. Now we're living it. We just have to figure out what we're going to do about it. I mean, here's Bart Gellman reporting today in The Atlantic. Quote, "The worst case is not that Trump rejects the election outcome. The worst case is that he uses his power to prevent a decisive outcome against him. If Trump sheds all restraint and if his Republican allies play the parts he assigns them, he could obstruct the emergence of a legally unambiguous victory for Biden. He could prevent the formation of consensus about whether there's any outcome from the election at all. He could seize on that uncertainty to hold on to power. Trump's state and national legal teams are already laying the groundwork for post-election maneuvers that would circumvent the results of the vote count in battleground states." And then Bart Gellman gets very specific as to how they're doing it. Listen to this. December 8th is known as the safe harbor deadline for appointing the 538 men and women who make up the Electoral College. Each state must appoint them by the safe harbor date, December 8th, to guarantee that Congress will accept their credentials as electors. Quote, "We're accustomed to choosing electors by popular vote, but nothing in the Constitution says it has to be that way. Article 2 provides that each state shall appoint electors in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. Since the late 19th century, every state has ceded the decision about who its electors are to its voters. Even so, the Supreme Court affirmed in Bush v. Gore that a state can take back the power to appoint electors. How and when a state might do so has not been tested for well over a century. Quote, Trump may test this. According to sources in the Republican Party at the state and national levels, the Trump campaign is discussing contingency plans to bypass election results and instead appoint loyal electors in battleground states where Republicans control the state legislature. With a justification based on claims of rampant fraud, Trump would ask state legislators to set aside the popular vote in their state and exercise their power instead to choose a slate of electors directly. The longer Trump succeeds in keeping the vote count in doubt, the more pressure state legislators will feel to act before the safe harbor deadline expires. To a modern democratic sensibility, discarding the popular vote for partisan gains looks uncomfortably like a coup, whatever license may be found for it in law. Would Republicans find that position disturbing enough to resist? Would they cede the election before resorting to such a ploy? Trump's base would exact a high price for that betrayal. And by this point, party officials would be invested in a narrative of fraud in the election. The Trump campaign legal advisor I spoke with told me the push to appoint electors would be framed in terms of protecting the people's will. Once committed to the position that any continued counting of ballots that extends beyond Election Day is somehow a rigged process, this advisor said, state lawmakers will want to judge for themselves what the voters of their states intended. The state legislatures will say, all right, we've been given this constitutional power. We don't think the results of our own state are accurate. So here's our slate of electors that we think properly reflect the results of our state, the Trump advisor said. Quote, in Pennsylvania, 3 Republican leaders told me they'd already discussed the direct appointment of electors among themselves. And one, the Republican state party chairman for Pennsylvania, said that he had discussed it already with Trump's re-election campaign. Martin Gellman reporting at The Atlantic tonight, based on sources at the Trump campaign. Sources advising the Trump campaign on this strategy, and sources in Republican legislators who say, yeah, they're talking to the Trump campaign about doing this. The get rid of the ballots plan is a real plan. To have Republican-controlled legislatures in all sorts of swing states, like let's say Pennsylvania, let's say Wisconsin, right? Let's say Ohio. Have Republican-controlled legislatures nullify any election results in their states. This is taking too long. We heard there's terrible fraud here. There's been allegations of terrible fraud here. Mail-in ballots are a fraud. We didn't get them counted on election night. We don't think anything counted after election night counts. They will nullify election results in their states. Say the whatever ballots are being counted here, this is all a fraud. This is all a hoax. We know who won this state. We'll appoint electors to the Electoral College who will tell you that Trump won this state, because the state legislatures have that power. And that, of course, would only happen amid a blizzard of court challenges, which would very quickly go to the Supreme Court, which is why the president insists he puts somebody on the Supreme Court right now, before the election, to make sure this plan works, to keep him installed for a second term, regardless of who votes how on election day or before. It's here. We are here. It's happening. We don't have to wonder anymore as individuals, right? We don't have to wonder, well, as citizens, we don't have to wonder what it would be like to live through a time like this. As individual citizens, we don't have to wonder anymore how we would react, how we would act, what we would do for our country if our country was ever in this kind of peril. You now know what you would do for your country if your country was ever in this much danger. It's whatever it is you're doing right now. What you're doing now, what you're planning to do for the next 6 weeks, that's what you're made of. That's what you'll be able to say you did when your country needed you.